The INFJ personality type, allegedly the rarest out of all the types and yet simultaneously the type that the most amount of people seem to be identifying with. In this video I'm going to be breaking down 5 myths associated with the type and hopefully by the end of it giving you a clearer idea of what the type actually is and whether or not you as an individual belong within this category. Myth number 1. The INFJ is a sensitive feeling type. Well, yes, we have a feeling function and yes, we happen to have an F within this acronym that we've been assigned. But in reality, the INFJ is primarily an intellectual, a theorist, an analyzer. Yes, the INFJ has an extroverted feeling function. Yes, we are aware of the social situation. Yes, we tend to absorb the emotions of other people to an extent. But generally speaking, what we do is we intake social information from the external world, and then we draw that into our dominant stack and attempt to rationalize it. Therefore, what we have is someone who takes in social information, human information, and then we place it into our dominant stack, introvert intuition, introvert thinking, and then we try to contain what we perceive within a universal theory of everything. We are highly philosophical, we are highly theoretical, we are highly analytical. Oftentimes we're so engaged with our analysis that we can actually become completely oblivious to the emotions of other people. The INFJ, yes, we can be very warm, just like any other type, but also just like any other type, we can also be extremely cold. We can be very callous. When we're engaged with various theoretical substrates, we can become completely obsessed with finding a rational answer for something and become completely oblivious to the emotions of another person. And it does not help that the introvert feeling function of the INFJ tends to reside in an unconscious position. As I've mentioned in the previous video, that means we're not particularly aware of our own emotions in the first place. We are not a type who has this consistent internal emotional dialogue. If you find yourself in a dialogue with your emotions, if you find yourself constantly assessing your sense of identity and assessing whether or not a course of action is congruent to your sense of who you are, I urge you to look into these two types, the ISFP and INFP. These types are most likely to have that constant sense of convergent internal dialogue with their emotional substrate. The INFJ is oftentimes oblivious to this dialogue. It'll be happening in an unconscious state, but if you consider yourself a sensitive, introverted feeling type, I urge you to look at those two types because you may find much more resonance and affinity with the type descriptions there than you would with what the INFJ actually is. The INFJ is overall an intellectual who takes in emotional information from the world and attempts to condense it within a theory of everything. Yes, the INFJ often gravitates towards artistic expression, but oftentimes this is the sole means of the type having a dialogue with their emotions. As soon as they manifest their emotions externally, then they can see the emotions. Don't forget, we have an extroverted feeling function, therefore we monitor externalized emotions. If we find a medium through which to externalize our emotions, then we can come to understand it. I know for me, music plays a huge role in my life because this is a means of bringing my emotions to light and having a dialogue with them. If you find yourself in a constant dialogue with your emotions and don't need an external medium to explore these emotions, you are very likely an introverted feeler, and I urge you to look into those types and hopefully get a clearer sense of who you are as an individual. So yes, the INFJ, like a lot of other types, has a feeling function, but this feeling function is oriented externally and thus more concerned with the emotions of the outer world than the emotions of the inner world. As such, the INFJ does not have an intensive emotional dialogue, and if you find yourself instigating such a dialogue on an everyday basis, then you are probably an introverted feeling type. Like with any other type, the INFJ will act according to their sense of identity. They are compelled towards actions in the external world by their limbic system, but generally the INFJ is predisposed towards creating ideas, conceptualizing, theorizing, philosophizing, having an intellectual conversation with someone. Oftentimes the INFJ is highly detached from their emotions, and sometimes when they're theorizing to a certain extent, they can become entirely detached from the emotions of the outer world as well, because it's important to remember that the dominant stack of the INFJ does not contain a feeling function. Therefore, their ego complex is predisposed towards objective codification and less predisposed towards empathy. And this brings me neatly to myth number 2. The INFJ is an empath. So yes, the INFJ has a feeling function. This feeling function is extroverted feeling, and yes, to some degree, as such, they are absorbing the emotions of the world around them. But this is a universal human trait. I cannot stress this enough. Everyone is an empath. Everyone is to some degree empathetic. With the exceptions of sociopaths and psychopaths, which is a very rare disorder, humans tend to use mirror neurons in order to absorb the emotions of other people, in order to empathize directly with the other person. Generally, in an existential sense, we see everyone else as an extension of ourselves. So the fact is, every single person is empathetic. Every single person absorbs, whether consciously or unconsciously, the emotions of other people. So yes, the INFJ does this as well. We are quite empathetic, and we are attuned to the emotions of the social world. And just like anyone else, the degree to which we are doing this fluctuates according to what functions we are using at any one time. If an INFJ is spending most of the time theorizing and whatnot, they're generally not going to be particularly empathic. They are generally not going to fit within this stereotype, because an INFJ who's more concerned with the dominant functions and who spends most of the time reflecting on various different kind of theoretical substrates is not going to be actively empathizing with other people. If you consider yourself highly empathic, highly attuned to the emotions of the world around you, or highly attuned through relational empathy to the situation another person is in, then I suggest you look into, such as in the former case, the ENTP, who's very, very highly aware of the emotional situation. In fact, I consider the ENTP the most likely out of all the 16 types to misdiagnose themselves as an INFJ, because the ENTP descriptions are rubbish. They are not describing what the ENTP is actually like. The ENTP is an extremely humanistic type. They're very sociable. They are extremely aware through their extrovert intuition and extrovert feeling of all the social information in the world around them. They feel extremely uncomfortable when someone's upset. They feel like they need to fix it. The ENTP is an extremely caring individual, and oftentimes the stereotype assigned to the ENTP does not align with reality. So the ENTP is one form of highly empathic type. Another empathic type is the INFP, which is similarly highly misdiagnosed with the INFJ type. Both introverted feeling dominant types, so the INFP and the ISFP, have an incredible depth of relational empathy. These are people who can place themselves and constantly place themselves through their convergent introverted feeling in the positions of other people. The INFJ, on the other hand, we have our feeling function within our divergent stack. Not only is it secondary, but it's also playing a more negative role. INFJ does not actively place themselves in a position of another person because this is an attribute associated with convergent feeling. Instead, the INFJ tends to absorb the emotions of the immediate social situation and attempt to rationalize them. Generally, the INFJ is not a ubiquitous placeholder for being an empath. So yes, the INFJ is empathic. We do happen to be human beings, but I would stress that those who have a more convergent feeling function, such as the INTJ, the ISFP, the ENFJ, the ENTP, these types are far more likely to actively relate to the position of another person, to see another person as an extension of who they are, than the INFJ. Us INFJs have an entire side to our personality, which is actually quite cold, calculating and analytical, that does not suit this empath stereotype assigned to this type code. And I do consider it a shame that we've gotten to a state in which it's become taboo to be vulnerable about our weaknesses. It's become taboo to display our vulnerabilities to other people, and that everyone feels they need to rally behind a banner, whether it's introvert or INFJ or another label entirely, in order to feel validated in what is perfectly natural, what is perfectly human. And I'm looking forward to a state in society whereby people can be open about these things, and being empathetic and being empathic is no longer seen as a rare human trait that has to be contained within a single type code. And just in case by empath you mean this kind of hyper-awareness of a psychic connection to this kind of emotional fabric connecting all human minds together, this isn't what I'm talking about within the context of this video. And if such a thing were to exist, I would stress that the INFJ is in no way more connected to this hyper-reality than any other type. So let's move on to myth number 3. The INFJ is mysterious and elusive. This cannot be any further from the truth. INFJs wear their emotions on their sleeve. We carry everything around us externalized. We don't hide emotions. We generally can't hide emotions. We're not even aware of the emotions that we need to hide. Generally, we will go completely unaware of our own emotions until someone passing by points out that we're feeling sad or we look happy. And then we're like, oh, am I? Great. That's awesome. Actually, now I think about it, maybe I'm happy. Generally, that tends to be the common case with an INFJ interaction. We are not people who contain things within ourselves. We are not secretive types. We don't have this vast private inner world. And generally, we're very open. In many ways, we're one of the most open out of all the 16 types. We tend to open up to other people, even if we're barely acquainted with them, about our vulnerabilities and about what we're going through, because we don't even feel that vulnerable about them in the first place. It's not that we're not vulnerable, it's the fact that we're not consciously aware of the emotional connection to these issues. Like I was saying before, we're a rationalistic type. We feel things unconsciously, oftentimes. We see things, and we try to rationalize them. We try to understand them within our introverted thinking frameworks. We often use people as a sounding board to help in our elucidations, to help in our rationalizations. We use conversation as a means to do this. We tend to seize any conversation we can in order to understand ourselves better. We tend to rely on mediums in order to externalize our emotions, because once we've externalized our emotions, we can analyze them, we can come to terms with them, we can rationalize them. So oftentimes the INFJ will be talking quite openly about things they are inwardly insecure about. They're going to be talking quite openly about how they feel or how they think they feel, or about something which is causing them to unconsciously feel a certain way so that they can manifest these emotions externally. And if you know anyone who is truly an INFJ, you probably would have noticed that they tend to act exactly the same around everybody. We tend to emphasize authenticity. We tend to emphasize being completely ourselves. We want to be completely accepted by people. We value one-on-one connections. We value intimate one-on-one relationships, and we want that person to know us entirely. It's extremely important to us. Overall, the INFJ is quite an easy person to get to know, and even if they're quite complicated individuals, they'll often be able to communicate what they are to people in a way which is understandable, and therefore they don't seem that complex anymore. And if you are assigning yourself an INFJ code in order to appear more mysterious and exude more enigmatic, attractive qualities, then you're using the wrong code. The INFJ is not enigmatic. The INFJ is not mysterious. The INFJ is in no way a private individual. We're very open. Therefore, the INFJ is simply not a mysterious personality type. If you want an example of a mysterious type, look at the INTJ. Look at the INFP. People with a convergent introverted feeling tend to be quite private about their emotions, only opening up to people who they trust completely. The INFJ isn't like this whatsoever. The INFJ opens up to absolutely everyone. We want everyone to see us. We want everyone to know who we are. And we don't want any secrets between us and the people that we love. And we tend to be even incompatible with people who overvalue mysteriousness, enigmaticism, because we wear our emotions on our sleeves and we talk about absolutely everything with anyone. We are conversationalists, and the more confident we are talking to people, the less private we become. Which brings me to myth number 4. We are solitary creatures who, even in the midst of a crowd of people, feel completely and utterly alone. This could not be any further from the truth. I understand that this is a ubiquitous human dilemma at the moment. Everybody feels, because we all hide behind these masks, that no one truly understands them. That in the midst of other people, we're all just gazing past each other because we're so afraid of meaningful human interaction, of exposing our vulnerabilities, that we cannot ever feel at one with others in a crowd of people. And that the people we pass on the street when we're out may as well be phantoms from another age because we're so intrinsically disconnected from each other. But you see, even though everyone is experiencing this phenomena in this modern age, the INFJ tends to be one of the types who experience this less than others. Generally, the INFJ, especially when they've grown in confidence, feels very open. They feel very comfortable being vulnerable to people. They feel very comfortable, even in a crowd of people, knowing that every one of those people have their own lives. Because even though the INFJ isn't actively empathetic, we take in social information and we rationalize it, and then over time, our introverted feeling relates to our rationalizations. It's a 3-step process. And the further along in that journey we become, the more attuned we become to the everyday situation of the average human being on planet Earth. If you feel lonely, if you feel isolated, if you feel misunderstood, rest assured knowing that people of all types are experiencing this very thing. And I understand terms like INFJ and introvert have just become generic banners for people who are particularly affected by this everyday phenomena to rally under and share the way in which they're being hurt by their loneliness in society, share their emotions, open up with other people about their vulnerabilities. But my problem is, when people are congregating under these terms, introvert and INFJ, they tend to create these echo chambers whereby people are telling each other, oh, okay, that's fine, it's not your fault, it's just the way you are. You're an INFJ, you're an introvert, there's nothing you can do about it. This is a victim complex. This is placing people in situations whereby they have no control. And it's just a vicious cycle because you have no control over this loneliness that you're feeling, while simultaneously being told that there's nothing you can do about it, it's just your type. Well, the fact is, no matter what your type is, you can't overcome this. There is no type which is more introverted than another type. Every type is an introvert. They just display loneliness and they interact with their introversion differently to other types. The reality is, though, the INFJ is not a loner in any way, shape or form. We're very social people. Often the INFJ, especially once they've entered their 20s, will have quite a high amount, as far as things go, of very deep and intimate social connections. Yes, they'll tend not to overlap their different social circles that much. We tend to like private relationships. We like to keep our relationships separate and just have nice one-on-one time. But the quality of our social experience is absolutely fantastic. And even within a community, we still get on extremely well with our acquaintances. And as I was saying before, we're very open with people. The fact that we wear our emotions on our sleeves opens ourselves up to others and subsequently opens other people up to us. It develops very strong human relationships, and we love to explore various different intellectual topics. So as soon as someone can open up about something that we can glean some kind of intellectual analysis from, then great, we're suddenly on a roll. The INFJ is an extremely social creature, and out of all the types, especially in the modern age, we tend to feel less alone than others. You see, the thing is, before the INFJ became the universal term for introversion, which is a state 50% of the people on planet Earth inhabit, by the way, the INFJ was actually known as one of the most social out of all the introverted types, and at times easily confused with an extrovert, because when we're in a social situation, we can be very intense, completely absorbed in the extroverted sensing, extroverted feeling moment. So yes, we will spend a vast amount of our time alone, and we tend to deal with solitude very well, but we still prioritize social interaction, and we still get completely absorbed in the moment when in a social situation. And finally, myth number 5, my personal favorite, the INFJ is psychic. So this is born of a complete misunderstanding of what introverted intuition actually is. And you'll see time and time again across the internet descriptions of introverted intuition positing the function as some kind of mysterious, enigmatic process whereby the unconscious mind digs into the very depths of one's soul and beyond, and then conjures up some kind of pattern, some kind of imagery, some kind of metaphor in order to dig into a reality beyond our own. Well, in reality, it's nothing like that. I mean, it would be great if there was a function like that, and maybe there is, but it isn't within this system. Introverted intuition is, in fact, simply a wide lens looking internally. So you have a lens, and then you direct it outwards. Therefore, the depth of the image becomes shallower. You direct the lens internally, and then you view a wide scope of information, which is comparatively more vague than, say, introverted sensing, which is a narrow scope lens. Therefore, someone with introverted intuition as their dominant function spends most of their time casting this lens internally, like I do. I like to view everything going on in my mind at once at the expense of detail. This is the manner in which the function is abstract, and not because the function is tied to a reality beyond our own. But you see, the thing about introverted intuitive dominance, especially INFJs, because their function is connected to their introverted thinking framework of everything, these types cannot abide coincidences. If they see a coincidence, they will try to force it into their theory of everything, because introverted intuition exists in order to make reality entirely predictable. It's a chain of patterns stored within the mind. Therefore, if anything breaks the pattern, if something is outside of the realm of introverted intuition predictive capabilities, something must be done about it. The framework must be adjusted in order to accommodate this coincidence, because coincidences cannot exist within a completely introverted intuitive landscape. And this situation is made worse because as introverted intuition is engaged at higher magnitudes, as it would be in this process, introverted sensing, its natural opposite, is disengaged. As I mentioned in my INFP versus INTP video, the dominant function will always be accessing the function opposing it to some degree. That means an introverted intuitive dominant will always be dipping in and out of introverted sensing and introverted intuition and vice versa. So that means there'll be a wide lens, and then we'll be honing into specific details within our brains in order to fine-tune our various theoretical concepts. But when trying to force a coincidence into our frameworks, we completely disengage introvert sensing. And as introvert sensing is disengaged, our memories of what just occurred become increasingly vague. This is because introvert sensing stores concrete experiences internally. And therefore, the less it is engaged, the more abstract, the more vague, and the more malleable that previously experienced becomes. Therefore, the coincidence that we are working with as soon as we activate a high magnitude of introverted intuition becomes utterly malleable. We can actually distort it. It is reconstructed over time. The longer we are doing this, the more that memory becomes distorted. And the easier it becomes to manipulate to such an extent as to be able to easily wedge it in to a gap that we've just formed within our introverted thinking framework. And obviously this isn't to cast complete doubt upon the possibility of people possessing psychic potential or there being a reality under our own that we can tap into through various different cogitative methods. But it is to say that no one function is more in touch with this deeper reality than any other function. So thank you so much for watching. I hope the video was informative. Let me know below what your favourite INFJ myth is. Is it one that I've mentioned here, or do you have another one entirely? And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like below. Click that subscribe button to stay notified of future content. I upload a video on similar topics every single week. So I will see you all same place, same time next week. So take care.